In the quiet suburbs of Portland, Maine, retired police K9 Max lies motionless on his bed, refusing even his favorite treats. His handler, retired Detective James Morrison, watches helplessly as his partner of 8 years wastes away, baffling local veterinarians. Then, on a rain-soaked evening, an unexpected knock at the door changes everything. A stranger stands there, clutching a weathered photograph that makes Morrison's blood run cold. Max, younger and alert, standing beside a small girl in a pink coat, their last unsolved case before retirement. The photograph unlocks a floodgate of memories, leading Morrison to realize that Max isn't just sick, he's grieving. But how could a dog remember a case from 5 years ago? And what really happened to 8-year-old Sarah Collins? Could this old photograph hold the key to saving not just Max, but also bringing closure to a family that has waited half a decade for answers? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning routine hadn't changed in 3 years. Not since James Morrison handed in his badge. Every day at precisely 6:00 a.m., Max would nose open the bedroom door, pad across the hardwood floor, and rest his graying muzzle on Morrison's bed. But this morning, Morrison woke to silence. The German shepherd's bed in the corner lay empty, the navy blue blanket undisturbed. He found Max in the kitchen, lying beside his untouched food bowl. The sight made Morrison's chest tighten. Even in retirement, Max maintained his disciplined schedule. Until now. Morrison knelt beside his partner, running weathered hands through the dog's thick fur. Max's brown eyes, once sharp and alert, held a distant look that Morrison had never seen before. "Come on, buddy," Morrison whispered, picking up a piece of kibble. "Just a few bites." Max turned his head away, a gesture so human it made Morrison's throat constrict. 3 days now without eating, and even the emergency vet had been stumped. The sound of keys in the front door broke the morning stillness. Emily, Morrison's daughter, stepped in, her scrubs wrinkled from an overnight shift at Portland General. At 32, she had her mother's practical nature and Morrison's stubborn determination to fix whatever was broken. "Still nothing?" she asked, setting down her medical bag. The concern in her voice matched the worry lines that had taken up residence on Morrison's face. Not a bite. Morrison stood slowly, his knee protesting the movement. "Doc Stevens called last night. Blood." Work came back normal again. Emily crouched beside Max, her trained hands moving efficiently over his body. As a veterinary surgical nurse, she'd been the first to notice something was wrong. "His gums are still pink at least. But Dad, we need to consider—" "He's not done." Morrison cut her off more sharply than he intended. "Sorry, it's just you didn't see him in his prime." The memory surfaced unbidden. Max charging through dense undergrowth, tracking a kidnapper who'd taken a 4-year-old from his backyard. They'd found the boy within hours, cold and scared but alive. Max had received a commendation for that one, adding to the impressive collection that now gathered dust on Morrison's bookshelf. Emily's voice softened. "Tell me about one of your cases. Something from before." Morrison settled into his worn leather armchair, the one that had survived both. His divorce and retirement. Max's ears twitched at the familiar creak of leather, a small sign he was still present, still listening. "It was about 6 years ago, just before everything changed. We got a call about a missing teenager." Morrison paused, watching Max's reaction. The dog's eyes had shifted slightly, tracking the sound of his voice. Max had this way of working crowds. Most K9s get overwhelmed by too many people, but not Max. He could filter through hundreds of scents, pick up the smallest trace. The story spooled out, a familiar comfort. Morrison found himself describing the way Max had threaded through the panicked crowd at a shopping mall, following a scent trail that led them to the girl who'd been hiding in a maintenance closet after a fight with her parents. It wasn't their most dramatic case, but it showcased Max's unique ability to read situations, to understand human behavior in a way that went beyond mere training. Emily checked her watch reluctantly. "I've got to head back for my shift. But Dad..." She hesitated at the door. "Maybe it's time to call Rachel. She always understood Max better than anyone, except you." Rachel Chen. Morrison hadn't spoken to his former captain in months, not since she'd tried to coax him back for consulting work. But Emily was right. Rachel had been there from the beginning, had chosen Max from the K9 training program personally. After Emily left, Morrison found himself staring at the phone. Max had shifted slightly, his head now resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the front door, as if waiting for something, or someone. The wall of service photographs caught Morrison's attention. 8 years of partnership captured in official ceremonies and candid moments. His gaze lingered on the most recent one, taken at their retirement ceremony. Max sat at attention, his posture perfect, despite the grey starting to dust his muzzle. Morrison stood beside him, one hand resting on Max's head, both of them facing. A future neither had been quite ready for, but it was the empty space beside that photo that nagged at him. There should have been one more commendation, one final success to cap their career. Instead, they'd left with their last case unsolved, a shadow that apparently still haunted them both. Morrison reached for his phone, scrolling to Rachel's number. As it rang, he watched Max's ears prick forward slightly, the first real response he'd shown in days. "Jim?" Rachel's voice carried the same commanding presence it had when she'd run the K9 unit. "It's been a while. Rachel, I need your help. It's Max." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Rachel had been there when they'd found Max's first missing child, had witnessed the almost supernatural connection between dog and handler develop. "Tell me," she said finally. As Morrison described Max's condition, he found himself including details he hadn't even shared with Emily. The way Max sometimes stood at the window in the middle of the night, staring into the darkness. How he'd started avoiding certain routes on their walks, routes they'd once patrolled regularly. "Bring him in," Rachel said without hesitation. "The old training facility. Maybe being back there will tell us something the vets can't see." Morrison looked at his partner, seeing not the aging dog before him, but the proud, powerful K9 who had never once let him down. "We'll be there in an hour." As he reached for Max's leash, a sound he hadn't heard in days emerged from his partner's throat, a soft whine of recognition. Whatever was happening with Max, Morrison was suddenly certain it had nothing to do with age or illness. Something else was at work here, something tied to their years of service together. He just had to figure out what Max was trying to tell him before it was too late. The Portland Police K9 Training Center hadn't changed in the decade since Morrison first walked through its gates. The same chain-link fences surrounded the obstacle course, now glistening with morning dew. As Morrison parked his weathered Subaru, he noticed Max's head lift slightly from the back seat, the first voluntary movement he'd seen from his partner in days. Rachel Chen stood waiting by the entrance, her silver hair pulled back in its characteristic tight bun. She'd traded her captain's uniform for civilian clothes, but her posture remained military straight. Her eyes narrowed as Morrison helped Max from the car. "Jesus, Jim," she muttered, taking in Max's condition. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" Morrison didn't answer immediately, focused on supporting Max as they made their way to the training yard. The German shepherd's steps were uncertain, but his nose was working, taking in the familiar sense of his old training ground. "Over here," Rachel directed, leading them to a shaded bench. She pulled something from her pocket, Max's old training collar, the leather worn smooth from years of use. "Found this while cleaning out my office last month. Thought you might want it." Morrison ran his fingers over the collar's smooth surface, remembering the day Rachel had first handed it to him. He'd been recovering from a shoulder wound, stuck on desk duty and fighting depression, when she'd appeared at his desk with a proposal. "We've got a new recruit," she'd said, dropping a photograph on his desk. "German shepherd, 18 months old. Different from any K9 I've worked with. The picture showed a young Max, alert and intense, already showing the focus that would make him legendary in the department. You said he was different, Morrison murmured now, watching Max slowly. Explore the familiar territory. You never told me why. Rachel settled onto the bench. Most K9s work from training and instinct. Max, he understood things. Human things. Remember the Martinez case? Morrison nodded. 6 years ago, a young mother had disappeared from a grocery store parking lot. Every other K9 unit had tracked her scent to her car and stopped. Max had sat down beside a security camera, barking until Morrison reviewed the footage. They'd found her within hours, locked in the trunk of a different car. She'd been carjacked and kidnapped. He didn't just follow scents, Rachel continued. He read situations, understood human behavior patterns. That's why I paired him with you. You both had that same instinct. A sound drew their attention. Max had made his way to the training wall, where dozens of photographs hung, K9 units past and present. He stood before them, tail low, but slightly moving. Talk me through these last few days, Rachel said, her tone shifting to the one she'd used in briefings. Everything, no matter how small. Morrison described Max's gradual withdrawal, the refusal to eat, the long stares out windows. As he spoke, he found himself adding details he hadn't consciously noted before, how Max would prick his ears at certain sirens, but not others. His new habit of sleeping by the front door instead of in his bed. Rachel listened intently, her expression growing more focused. When did it start? Exactly? Last Thursday. I remember because... Morrison stopped, something clicking in his memory. Because it was the anniversary of my retirement and your last case. Rachel's voice was carefully neutral. The Collins girl. The name hit Morrison like a physical blow. Sarah Collins, 8 years old, disappeared walking home from school. Max had tracked her scent to a van, followed it for miles, but lost it at the city limits. It was the only child they'd never found. Max was different after that case, Rachel said quietly. You both were. It's why you took early retirement, isn't it? Morrison watched his partner, now lying beside the photo wall, eyes half closed but alert. He knew we missed something. Kept trying to go back to certain locations, but the brass had moved on to other cases. Said there were no new leads. Rachel pulled out her phone, scrolled through it with practiced efficiency. There's something you should see. She handed him the device, open to a news article from 2 weeks ago. The headline made his heart skip. New evidence in 2020, missing child cases. They found a connection, Rachel explained. 3 other girls, same age range as Sarah Collins, all disappeared within a 100-mile radius. Different jurisdictions, so nobody put it together until now. Morrison felt a familiar tension building in his chest, the same feeling he used to get when Max alerted to a fresh trail. Why wasn't I notified? Different department handling it now. FBI's involved. Rachel hesitated. But that's not all. One of the other girls. They found her, alive, 2 days ago. Max's head lifted suddenly, his ears forward. A low whine escaped him, the same sound he used to make when he caught a significant scent. He knows, Morrison whispered. Somehow, he knows something's happening. With the case, Rachel stood, her expression shifting to one Morrison recognized from their working days. The girl they found, Katie Martinez, she's at Portland General under protection, Emily's hospital. Emily. Morrison pulled out his phone, checking his messages. There was one from his daughter, sent hours ago. Dad, need to talk to you about something. It's important. Max was on his feet now, swaying slightly but standing. His eyes were clearer than they had been in days, fixed on Morrison with an intensity that brought back memories of countless investigations. Rachel, Morrison said slowly, I need access to our old case files, all of them. She was already pulling out a USB drive. Been waiting 3 years for you to ask. Everything's here. Official reports, your notes, Max's tracking data. I kept Copies when you retired. A slight smile crossed her face. Against regulations, of course. Morrison pocketed the drive, feeling the weight of it like a badge being returned to him. Why'd you really keep all this? Rachel's expression softened as she looked at Max. Because I knew that dog. Knew you. Some cases don't end. They just go quiet for a while. She touched Max's head gently. And sometimes the ones who know the truth can't speak it in words. Max pressed against Morrison's leg, a gesture from their working days, signaling he'd found something important. Looking down at his partner, Morrison saw something he hadn't in days. Purpose. Come on, old friend, he said softly. We've got work to do. The rain had started again by the time Morrison pulled into his driveway, transforming the early evening into a gray haze. Max sat more upright in the back seat, his posture reminiscent of their patrol days. The USB drive from Rachel felt heavy in Morrison's pocket, laden with possibilities and old ghosts. He was helping Max from the car when he noticed the figure on his porch, a man in his mid-40s wearing a rain-soaked jacket, pacing with the restless energy of someone who'd been waiting a while. As Morrison approached, Max's posture changed subtly, his head lifting in a way Morrison hadn't seen since before his retirement. Detective Morrison? The man's voice carried a slight tremor. I'm Michael Collins, Sarah's uncle. The name hit Morrison like a physical blow. Behind him, Max let out a low whine, the first vocal response he'd shown in days. Mr. Collins, Morrison managed, his throat tight. Let's get out of this rain. Inside, Morrison's trained eye caught the details, Collins' expensive watch contrasting with his worn shoes, the slight tremor in his hands as he reached into his messenger bag, the way his eyes kept darting to Max, who had positioned himself unusually close to the stranger. I've been trying to find you, Collins said, pulling out a manila envelope. The department wouldn't give me your contact information. Said you'd retired 3 years ago. Morrison gestured to his living room, where photographs of his canine career lined the walls. What brings you here now? Collins opened the envelope with careful movements. 2 days ago, they found Katie Martinez. He paused, watching Morrison's reaction. But you already knew that, didn't you? Morrison nodded slowly. Just found out today. Former captain told me. What they haven't released to the public, Collins continued, is what Katie told them. About where she was kept. About the other. Girls. His hands shook as he withdrew a photograph. About Sarah. Max's head snapped up at the name, his eyes fixed on the photograph in Collins' hands. Morrison felt his chest tighten as Collins held it out. The image was clearly from their investigation. Max, younger and alert, standing beside Sarah Collins in her pink coat. They were in front of her school, the day Morrison and Max had gone, to collect scent articles. Sarah was smiling, one hand buried in Max's fur, the same photograph that had hung in the precinct for months during the investigation until the case went cold and was quietly filed away. Katie Martinez described a dog, Collins said quietly, a German shepherd that would visit where they were being held. Said it came right up to the building several times, but always with police who never looked in the right place. Morrison's mind raced back. They'd followed Max's leads for weeks, checking multiple locations. But each time, they'd been called off, told they were wasting resources as the trail grew colder. Max knew, Collins said, watching the dog who now sat alert between them. He found the place, didn't he? But nobody listened. Morrison stood abruptly, moving to his office. He returned with a map marked with dozens of points, every location Max had led them to during the investigation. Show me where they found Katie. Collins leaned over the map, his finger landing on a point Morrison had circled multiple times. Old Industrial Park off Route 9. Max led you there? 3 times. Morrison's voice was hoarse. Said the scent trail ended there. Brass said it was just because of the chemical plants in the area interfering with the scent. Max moved to the map, his nose touching the exact spot. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound Morrison hadn't heard since their working days. Katie said Sarah was there. Collins continued, his voice catching. For at least the first year, she thinks Sarah might have been moved, but she's not sure where or when. Morrison studied the photograph again, seeing details he'd forgotten. The determination in Max's stance, even then. The way Sarah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, as if she sensed what was coming. "There's more," Collins said, pulling out a notebook. Katie remembered details, schedules, routines. She heard them talking about other locations. And there was someone who wore a police uniform sometimes. Morrison's head snapped up. Inside the department. Collins nodded grimly. Katie couldn't see faces clearly from where they were kept, but she heard names, conversations. Max had moved to the front. At door, his posture alert, tail slightly raised, his working stance. Morrison recognized it from countless investigations. His partner had caught a scent, metaphorically or literally. "Mr. Collins," Morrison said slowly, "I need you to tell me everything Katie told you. Every detail, no matter how small." "That's why I came to you," Collins replied, pulling more papers from his bag. "The FBI's involved now, but they're looking at the big picture, the trafficking network, the other cases. But Sarah..." He spread out printed emails, handwritten notes, newspaper clippings. "Sarah's my responsibility, and after what Katie said about the dog, about Max..." He looked up, his eyes wet. "I think she's still out there, and I think Max knows something. We don't..." Morrison thought of the USB drive in his pocket, of Rachel's careful preservation of their case files, of Max's sudden decline coinciding with Katie's rescue, as if some internal clock had started ticking. "How much time do we have?" Morrison asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be enough. Katie overheard them talking, right before she escaped. "About moving operations, destroying evidence." Collins' hands clenched. "Days, maybe, if we're lucky." Max whined again, pawing at the door. Morrison recognized this behavior. His partner had caught onto something urgent, needed to move. "I'll need to make some calls," Morrison said, reaching for his phone. "Emily, my daughter, works at Portland General. She might be able to arrange a meeting with Katie." "Already done," Collins said quietly. "Your daughter's the one who helped me find you. She recognized Sarah from the photograph Katie kept talking about. This one." He tapped the image on the table. Morrison looked at his partner, seeing not the aging dog of recent weeks, but the determined canine who had never given up on Sarah Collins. Max stared back, his eyes clear and focused for the first time in days. "Okay," Morrison said, feeling the familiar surge of a case reopening. "Let's get to work." The Collins family home sat on a quiet street in suburban Portland, unchanged since Morrison had last visited 5 years ago. The same tire swing hung from the maple tree out front, now weathered and still. Sarah's pink bicycle, the one she'd been riding the day she disappeared, remained mounted above the garage door, a memorial frozen in time. Morrison sat in his car, Max alert in the back seat, watching Thomas and Marie Collins through their front window. Michael had called ahead, but Morrison still felt the weight of this moment. The last time he'd seen Sarah's parents, he'd been returning her backpack, the only trace Max had found. "Ready, partner," he murmured. Max's reflection in the rearview mirror showed the focused expression Morrison remembered from their working days. The dog's appetite had returned slightly after Michael's visit, though he'd only accept food from Morrison's hand, as if afraid to leave his handler's side. Marie opened the front door before they reached it. She'd aged a decade in 5 years, her once dark hair now streaked with grey, her eyes fixed on Max first, widening in recognition. "He remembers the house," she said softly, watching Max navigate the familiar path to their door. After all this time. Inside, Thomas Collins stood by the fireplace, still an imposing figure despite the stoop in his shoulders. The mantel behind him held school photographs of Sarah, arranged chronologically, ending abruptly at age 8. "Michael told us about Katie Martinez," Thomas said without preamble. "Said you're looking into things again." Morrison nodded, settling into an offered armchair. Max positioned himself between Morrison and the Collins, his behavior notably different from their previous visits. Back then, he'd constantly searched the house, trying to pick up Sarah's scent. Now he remained still, watchful. Katie's testimony changes everything, Morrison explained, removing Rachel's USB drive from his pocket. And there's something else. Files from the original investigation. Everything that didn't make it into the official reports. Marie's hands twisted in her lap. They told us you'd followed every lead. We did, Morrison said carefully. But some leads got shut down before we could fully explore them. He connected the drive to his laptop, opening a folder of Max's tracking data. See these points? Max led us to these locations multiple times. The department said they were false leads, that the industrial chemicals were interfering with his scent work. Thomas leaned forward, studying the map. That's where they found Katie. Yes. Morrison highlighted another series of points. But Max also kept returning to these locations, different jurisdictions, so we couldn't get warrants. But now there's a pattern. Marie finished, her voice stronger. She went to a cabinet, returning with a worn accordion file. I've been keeping track too. Every missing child case within 100 miles. Every suspicious vehicle report. She spread out newspaper clippings, printouts, handwritten notes. People thought I was obsessing, but look. Morrison compared her. Notes to Rachel's files. Patterns emerged, descriptions of vehicles, time frames, locations that overlapped with Max's tracking data. But something else caught his eye. A series of incident reports involving a police cruiser. These reports, he said, pointing, about the patrol car near schools. Marie nodded grimly. Different jurisdictions, different times, but always the same description. Older model, missing hubcap on the rear driver's side. Teachers called it in, but nothing ever came of it. Max suddenly stood, moving to Sarah's backpack, which still hung by the door. He nosed at it, then looked at Morrison, with an intensity that made the retired detective's pulse quicken. The backpack, Morrison said slowly. We never found everything that was in it. Thomas frowned. What do you mean? You returned everything to us? Morrison moved to the backpack, gently taking it down. Max found it in the park, 3 days after. Sarah disappeared. It had her lunchbox, her books. He opened it carefully, but her diary was missing. You'd mentioned she always carried it. Marie's breath caught. They told us she must have lost it before, that it wasn't relevant. Morrison examined the backpack's lining, feeling something he'd missed years ago. A tear in the inner seam, carefully sewn shut. This repair. Who did this? Repair. Marie took the bag, fingers tracing the stitching. I never repaired it. Sarah had just gotten it for the new school year. Max whined, pawing gently at the bag. Morrison recognized the behavior. His partner had found evidence. Carefully, Morrison opened the seam. Inside, tucked between the layers of fabric, was a small notebook, its pages wrinkled but intact. Her diary, Thomas whispered. But how? Why would someone hide it there? Morrison handed the diary to Marie, who opened it with trembling hands. The last entry, he suggested quietly, the day before she disappeared. Marie read aloud, her voice shaking. Saw the police car again today. The nice officer waved. He knows my name now, says he's friends with Uncle Michael from the station. She looked up sharply. But Michael never worked at the station. He was in Seattle then. Morrison felt a cold certainty settling in his gut. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew enough about your family to make her trust them. He turned to Thomas. Did you ever report seeing this police car? Thomas shook his head. We assumed it was just regular patrol, keeping the kids safe. Max had moved to the window, his posture alert. Outside, a car drove past slowly, an older model police cruiser. Morrison caught a glimpse of the rear driver's side. Missing hubcap. Call Michael, Morrison said quickly, moving to the door. Tell him to meet us at Rachel's, and don't tell anyone else we found the diary. Marie clutched the notebook to her chest. "Jim, find her, please." Morrison looked at his partner, seeing the same determination he felt reflected in Max's stance. "We will. This time, we're following every lead, no matter where it takes us." As they left the Collins home, Morrison noticed Max's changed behavior. Head high, steps purposeful. The old tracking harness in Morrison's trunk would still fit. It was time to put it back on. Rachel's home office looked more like a war room now. Maps covered one wall, photos and timelines another, with red string connecting various points of interest. Morrison stood before them, Sarah's diary in his hands, while Max lay alert by the door, his old guard position. "That cruiser's come by 3 more times," Rachel said, hanging up her phone. "Different drivers but same vehicle. They're watching us." Morrison nodded, turning to Michael Collins, who sat surrounded by papers at Rachel's desk. "What did your FBI contact say?" "They're focused on the trafficking network," Michael replied, frustration evident in his voice. "Say they can't divert resources to a 5-year-old case when they're trying to prevent new abductions." "But they're missing the connection," Rachel interjected, pinning another photo to the wall. Katie Martinez's rescue, that cruiser showing up again, Max's behavior. It's all linked. Morrison ran his fingers over the diary's worn cover. "We need someone on the inside. Someone still active in the department who can access current patrol records." Rachel smiled slightly. "Already done." She nodded toward her front window as a car pulled up outside. "Detective Sandra Martinez, Katie's aunt, recently transferred to Internal Affairs." The woman who entered looked nothing like a typical detective. Early 40s, dressed in running clothes, she could have been any suburban mom out for a morning jog. But Morrison recognized the alert assessment in her eyes as she scanned the room, the slight bulge of a concealed weapon at her ankle. Max's reaction was immediate and unexpected. He rose, tail wagging, and approached Sandra with none of his usual reserve towards strangers. "He remembers me," Sandra said softly, kneeling to greet the dog. "From Katie's rescue. He was there, wasn't he?" Outside the building, Morrison exchanged glances with Rachel. "What do you mean?" "Katie kept talking about a German shepherd," Sandra explained, still petting Max. "Said she'd see it through the basement window sometimes, years ago, that it would bark and bark, but the police with it never searched inside." She looked up at Morrison. "It was driving me crazy, trying to figure out why that detail seemed familiar. Then I pulled the old case files, found your reports about Max alerting at that same building. 3 separate times." Rachel spread out a series of photographs. On her desk, "These just came in from our street surveillance. The cruiser that's been circling. It matches vehicle reports from 5 other missing children cases, all within the last decade." "But that's not possible," Michael interjected. "That cruiser would have been decommissioned years ago. Unless someone wanted to keep it in service," Sandra said quietly. "Someone with enough authority to override normal procedures." Max suddenly moved to the wall of photos, nosing at one in particular. Morrison stepped closer, feeling his pulse quicken. The image showed a police awards ceremony from 6 years ago. In the background, partially obscured but visible, was Sarah Collins's pink backpack, 3 days before she disappeared. The ceremony was at her school, Morrison remembered. Community outreach program. But look who's standing next to her. Rachel leaned in, her expression hardening. Captain Gerald Hayes. He was in charge of youth services then. "Was?" Sandra asked sharply. "Retired 2 years ago, right after the FBI started looking into trafficking patterns in the region." Rachel pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. "But here's the interesting part. He's still seen around the department. Consulting work, he says." Morrison watched Max, who had returned to his alert position by the door. The dog's behavior had shifted subtly, the same intensity he used to show when they were close to finding someone. "Sandra," Morrison said slowly, "you said Katie saw Max through a basement window. Could she tell what time of day?" "Always at night," Sandra replied. She said the dog would come with police, but they never shined lights in the windows, never really searched, just walked around the building once and left. Morrison felt a cold certainty settling in his gut. Those weren't real searches. They were checking on their operation, making sure everything was secure. And Max, he looked at his partner with newfound understanding. Max knew something was wrong about those officers. It's why he kept trying to go back. "Jim," Rachel said. "Quietly, you need to see this." She had pulled up an old surveillance photo. It showed the suspicious cruiser, its driver barely visible but recognizable, Gerald Hayes, 3 months after his retirement. Max stood suddenly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Through the window, they saw the cruiser passing again, moving slowly past Rachel's house. "They know we're putting it together," Sandra said, moving away from the window. "And they know Katie's memory is coming back. We need to move fast." Morrison felt the familiar weight of his badge in his pocket. Rachel had returned it to him that morning, along with his official credentials. "Temporary reinstatement," she'd said. "Called in some favors." "Sandra," he said, decision made. "How? Quickly, can you get us department surveillance access?" "Already have it. Internal Affairs has quite a reach." She pulled out a laptop. "But we need to be careful. If Hayes still has friends in the department—" "He does," Rachel confirmed grimly. "More than we know, probably. This goes deep." Morrison knelt beside Max, seeing the same determination in his partner's eyes that he felt in his own heart. "Then we work from the outside in. Max found that building 3 times before they shut us down. This time, we're not asking permission." "Jim," Michael started, concern evident in his voice. "No," Morrison cut him off. 5 years ago, they took our case away, buried the evidence, made us retire. But Max knew. He's been trying to tell us for years." He stood, feeling the familiar surge of a case breaking open. "Sandra, get us everything you can on Hayes's movements. Rachel, we need current blueprints of that building. Michael, I'll contact Katie," Michael finished. "See what else she remembers." Max moved to Morrison's side, pressing against his leg, their old signal for readiness. Morrison felt the weight of Sarah's diary in his pocket, thinking of all the entries they hadn't yet read. Somewhere in those pages, written in a child's hand, might be the key to understanding how deep this conspiracy really went. "Be careful," Rachel warned. "If they're watching us—" "We're counting on it," Morrison replied, seeing the same realization. Dawn in Sandra's eyes, because this time we're watching them too. The laptop's glow illuminated Morrison's kitchen at midnight, casting shadows across maps and documents spread across his table. Max hadn't left his side for hours, watching as Morrison pieced together Sarah's diary entries with Sandra's internal affairs data. Emily sat across from them, medical records pulled up on her tablet, while Rachel worked the phone with contacts in neighboring jurisdictions. "Look at this pattern," Emily said, highlighting a series of dates. "Every time Hayes made an unscheduled visit to a school, a child went missing within 2 weeks. But never from that same school, always from one across town." Morrison nodded, seeing the strategy. Misdirection. He was establishing his presence in one location while scouting targets in another. He turned to a diary entry from 3 weeks, before Sarah disappeared. "The nice officer came to class today, showed us his badge and everything, said we should always trust police if we're in trouble." Max's head lifted suddenly, ears forward. Outside, a car passed slowly. Not the cruiser this time, but a dark sedan they'd noticed earlier. Rachel moved to the window, snapping photos with her phone. "That's the 3rd pass tonight," she muttered. "Different vehicle, same pattern. They're coordinating." Morrison's phone buzzed. Sandra, sending surveillance footage from traffic cameras near the industrial park. The timestamp showed 3 a.m., 2 days before Katie's rescue. The familiar cruiser appeared, followed by 3 other vehicles, all registered to shell companies that Sandra's investigation had linked to Hayes. "Emily," Morrison said, studying the footage, "you said Katie's medical records showed long-term exposure to industrial chemicals." Emily nodded, pulling up the relevant files. Specific compounds used in leather treatment. The FBI thought it might help narrow down locations, but there, Rachel interrupted, pointing to one of Morrison's maps. The industrial park where Max kept leading us. There's a leather processing plant 2 blocks from where they found Katie. Max stood abruptly, moving to the map with purpose. His nose touched a point they hadn't focused on before. An abandoned warehouse district on the other side of the park. What is it, boy? Morrison watched his partner's behavior carefully. This wasn't random. Max was trying to tell them something specific. Rachel was already searching property records. The warehouse district, most of it's owned by offshore companies, but look at this one. She turned her laptop, showing a corporate filing. The holding company's address matches one used by another shell corporation, one that just bought 3 properties near schools where Hayes was last seen. Morrison felt the familiar surge of pieces clicking together. He opened Sarah's diary to the last few entries, reading more carefully now. Officer Hayes says he has a daughter my age. Says she'd love to meet me, but she goes to private school across town. Funny, though. I saw him at the mall yesterday, but he pretended not to know me. Jim, Emily said quietly. Katie's latest session notes. She mentioned something about other girls being moved when the trucks came. Said it always happened. At night, and they could smell leather. Max whined softly, pawing at the map again. Morrison looked closer at the warehouse his partner indicated. Rachel, what do we know about this building's history? Used to be a distribution center, she replied, typing rapidly. Closed down 5 years ago, right after... She paused, her expression changing. Right after you and Max were forced to retire. Morrison stood, moving to his office. He returned with his old case notebooks, flipping to entries from their last month on duty. Here, Max kept trying to lead us to that warehouse too, but we had strict orders to focus on the leather plant area. Said that's where the scent trail was strongest, because that's what they wanted you to think. Sandra's voice came from Morrison's phone speaker. They'd kept her on conference call while she worked her shift. Just got access to Hayes's old patrol records. He logged 16 unofficial visits to that warehouse in the month before Sarah disappeared. Listed them as community outreach in sectors that don't even exist. Max moved restlessly between the map and the door, his behavior reminiscent of when he'd caught a fresh trail. Morrison recognized the signs. His partner wasn't just remembering anymore. He was actively working. The diary, Emily said suddenly. Dad, what's the entry right before the last one, the day before she disappeared? Morrison turned the pages carefully. Saw the leather store today on my way home from school. It smells funny. There was a police car parked behind it, but not a normal one. It looked older, like in the old movies Mom watches. Rachel's phone chimed. Michael just sent something from Katie's new statement. She remembers being moved between buildings, through some kind of tunnel system. Said they used to hear trucks above them. Morrison looked at the warehouse district plans again. Underground service tunnels. They're all connected. The leather plant, the warehouse, probably half the industrial park. That's how they move the girls without being seen. Max barked once. Sharp, authoritative. Morrison had heard that bark thousands of times. His partner had found something crucial. The chemicals, Emily said, understanding dawning in her eyes. They weren't just from the leather plant. They were using them to mask scents in the tunnels. That's why Max kept getting confused between locations. Morrison felt a fierce pride in his partner. Even then, Max had been trying to tell them about the tunnels, about the connection between locations, but they'd been ordered to focus on surface searches, to ignore his attempts to investigate the warehouse district. Sandra, Morrison said into the phone, we need current subway maintenance maps, anything showing underground infrastructure in that area. Already on it, Sandra replied. But Jim, there's something else. Hayes made a call an hour ago from a burner phone. We traced it to the warehouse, Morrison finished, watching Max's intense focus on the map. They're moving something or someone. Rachel was already gathering her gear. I'll call in some favors, get us unofficial backup, people I trust." "No," Morrison said, an idea forming. "They're watching us, expecting us to move in force." He looked at his partner, seeing the same strategic understanding in Max's stance that had made them legendary in the department. "But they're not watching the tunnels, not anymore." "Dad," Emily warned, "if you're thinking what I think you're thinking—" "Max found those tunnels 5 years ago," Morrison said quietly. "They made us ignore him then. But now—" He reached for Max's old tracking harness, kept ready since their visit to the training center. "Now we're doing this his way." Max stood at attention, every line of his body showing the focus and determination that had made him the department's top K9. No signs now of the depressed, aging dog from weeks ago. This was Max, as Morrison remembered him best, ready to hunt. Time to go to work, partner. Detective Frank Reeves lived in a small house on the outskirts of Portland, its yard meticulously maintained despite his advanced age. At 72, he was one of the few officers who'd worked missing persons cases in the region for over 3 decades. As Morrison pulled up, he noticed Max's immediate attention fix on the house. Something about this place or this man had triggered his partner's interest. "Wondered when you'd show up," Reeves said as he opened the door, leaning on a cane. His eyes went straight to Max. "Still working, I see." There was something knowing in his tone that made Morrison pay closer attention. Inside, Morrison recognized the familiar organization of a detective who'd never really retired. Case files lined the walls, each labeled with a child's name and date. But it was the map on Reeves's dining room wall that drew Max's immediate attention. It mirrored their own investigation board, with many of the same locations marked. "You've been following the Hayes connection," Morrison said. It wasn't a question. Reeves settled into a worn armchair, gesturing for Morrison to sit. "Started noticing patterns back in '95. Children going missing near schools where certain officers had done community outreach. Always the same setup. Gain trust, establish presence, then take kids from different locations to avoid connection." Max moved to a particular section of Reeves's wall, whining softly. Morrison followed, finding himself looking at newspaper clippings about a missing girl from 1997. "Jessica Chen," he read. 7 years old. "Rachel's niece," Reeves finished quietly. "That case is why she joined the force, why she later started the K9 unit." He watched Max carefully. "Why she chose your partner specifically." Morrison felt the weight of this revelation. "What do you mean?" Reeves stood with effort, moving to a filing cabinet. "Max isn't just any police dog, Morrison. He's from a special breeding program. Dogs trained specifically to track children. Rachel knew about it from her time investigating Jessica's disappearance." He pulled out a thick file. "These dogs have something extra, an ability to remember cases, connections, patterns, sometimes years after the fact." Max's attention was fixed on Reeves now, his posture showing recognition. Morrison remembered Rachel's words from years ago. "He's different from any K9 I've worked with." "The program was shut down," Reeves continued, "right around the time Hayes started rising in the department. Said it was too expensive, too specialized. But really?" He spread out a series of photographs showing different German shepherds at crime scenes. These dogs were getting too close, finding connections nobody wanted found. Morrison studied the photos. Each showed a dog alerting at locations that looked familiar: warehouses, industrial areas, schools. They were finding the network, and the network noticed. Reeves tapped a newspaper article from 2018. Every handler who got too close was either transferred, retired, or— He didn't finish the sentence. "Max was the last one from the program. Rachel managed to get him assigned to you because she knew you'd listen to him. Trust his instincts." Max moved to Morrison's side, pressing against his leg, their old signal for urgency. Morrison pulled out Sarah's diary, showing it to Reeves. "We found this hidden in her backpack, sewn into the lining." Reeves examined the diary with practiced care. "Hayes mentioned in here?" "Multiple times. But there's something else." Morrison opened to an entry they hadn't focused on before. "Today, at the mall, I saw another girl with a police officer. She looked scared, but he had a badge, so I didn't say anything. It was the same mall where Jessica went missing, according to the missing poster." Reeves' expression sharpened. She made the connection. That's why they moved so fast to take her. He turned to his wall of files, pulling out another diary, this one older, worn. Jessica Chen's, found it years later, hidden in a library book. Look at the last entry. Morrison, read aloud. "The officer said other girls would like to meet me, that they have special parties in the big buildings where the trucks are. But Mom says never to go anywhere with strangers, even police, without checking first. Tomorrow I'm going to ask my teacher about it." "She never made it to school the next day," Reeves said quietly. "Pattern's always the same. They take the smart ones, the ones who start noticing things." Max barked suddenly, moving to Reeves's map. His nose touched a location they hadn't marked on their own map. An old library, now closed. The library where they found Jessica's diary, Reeves confirmed. "But here's what nobody else noticed." He overlaid a utility map, showing the underground tunnel system. "That library, it connects to the same tunnel network as your warehouse district." Morrison felt the pieces shifting, forming a new pattern. "They're not just moving the girls through the tunnels. They're using them to hide evidence too. For 30 years, Reeves agreed. Different locations, different officers, but always the same system. And now, he pointed to recent surveillance photos on his wall, the same vehicles they'd been tracking. "They're moving again. Something spooked them." "Katie's rescue," Morrison said, and Max's reaction to it. "They know he remembers, knows the connections." Reeves nodded grimly. "Rachel's been keeping me updated. That's why I'm giving you this." He handed Morrison a key. "To a storage unit. Everything I couldn't officially report. Everything that got buried or dismissed. 30 years of connecting the dots they didn't want connected." Max's posture had changed, the alert stillness that preceded action. Outside, they heard a car slow down, then speed up. "They're watching you too," Morrison realized. "Have been for years." Reeves smiled slightly. "But they think I'm just a retired old man with too many memories. They don't know about the storage unit, or that I've been feeding information to Rachel since Jessica disappeared." Morrison pocketed the key, understanding now why Rachel had sent them here. "The FBI investigation is looking at recent cases only," Reeves finished. "They don't see the whole picture, but Max does." He looked at the German Shepherd with respect. "These dogs, they never forget, and now that Katie's rescue opened the door, he's going to finish what the program started," Morrison said, watching his partner's determined stance. "What all those other dogs tried to expose. Just be careful," Reeves warned. "Hayes isn't the top of this pyramid. The deeper you dig, we'll find them all," Morrison promised, feeling Max's solid presence beside him. "This time, we're not letting anyone shut us down." The storage unit sat at the back of a nondescript facility on the outskirts of Portland. Morrison checked his mirrors again. No sign of surveillance, but the hair on the back of his neck wouldn't settle. Beside him, Max remained alert, scanning their surroundings with practiced efficiency. Rachel met them at the gate, her expression tense. "Sandra's gone dark." Morrison felt his stomach tighten. "What do you mean, dark?" "Missed her check-in, phone's off. Emily says she never made it to Katie's morning interview." Rachel's hands clenched. "And there's more. That anonymous tip about Hayes came from inside the department, Assistant Chief Warner's office." Morrison inserted Reeves's key into the storage unit's lock, mind racing. Warner had been Hayes's partner 20 years ago, before climbing the ranks. The door rolled up with a metallic groan, revealing walls of carefully organized evidence, photographs, files, maps, all meticulously labeled. Max's reaction was immediate and unexpected. He moved directly to a stack of boxes in the corner, pawing at one insistently. Morrison opened it, finding old K9 unit files, documentation of the specialized breeding program Rachel had told him about. "Look at this," Rachel said, pulling out a photograph. It showed a younger Warner and Hayes standing with a German shepherd, one that looked remarkably like Max. "That's Max's sire, assigned to Warner before the program was shut down." Morrison examined the photo more closely. "What happened to the dog?" "Official report says he was killed in action, pursuing a suspect." Rachel's voice was tight. "But Reeves kept digging, found evidence he was poisoned after leading investigators to a warehouse owned by a shell company connected to Hayes," Morrison finished. He turned to another file, this one containing veterinary records. "All of them. Every dog from the program that got too close." Max barked sharply, drawing their attention to another box. Inside, Morrison found something that made his blood run cold. Internal Affairs investigations into officer-involved child disappearances, all marked closed, insufficient evidence, and signed by Warner. Rachel's phone buzzed. "Text from Emily. She's at the hospital with Katie." She read the message, her face paling. Katie remembered something else. Said sometimes the men who came to check on them wore police chief badges. Morrison was about to respond when Max suddenly went rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Through the storage unit's small window, they saw a familiar dark sedan cruise past, the same one that had been watching Morrison's house. "Rachel," Morrison said quietly, "when did Warner become assistant chief?" 5 years ago." She met his eyes. "Right after Sarah disappeared." Morrison's phone chimed, an email from an anonymous account. The subject line made his heart stop. "Your daughter says hello." The attached photo showed Emily, unconscious or drugged, lying in what appeared to be a concrete room. A copy of today's newspaper lay beside her. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was the leather processing plant's logo. "They have Emily." Morrison's voice was ice. "They knew we'd find Reeves's evidence. This was a trap." Max's growl deepened as 2 more vehicles appeared outside, the old police cruiser and an unmarked van. Rachel drew her weapon, positioning herself by the door. "Jim," she said urgently, "you need to see this." She'd opened another file, this one containing financial records. "Warner isn't just covering for Hayes. He's been running the entire operation for decades. Hayes was his enforcer, but Warner's the one with connections to trafficking networks across the country." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Warner's rapid rise through the ranks, the systematic elimination of dogs from the specialized program, the careful misdirection of every investigation that got too close. Morrison's phone rang, Sandra's number. He answered on speaker. "Morrison." Warner's voice, smooth and professional. "I believe we need to discuss your retirement package." "Again. Where's my daughter?" "Safe. For now. Unlike Detective Martinez, who made the unfortunate decision to access restricted files." A pause. "You have something that belongs to me. 30 years of my work, carefully documented by that sentimental old fool Reeves. Bring it to the leather plant, 1 hour, just you and the dog. And if I bring this evidence to the FBI instead..." Warner's laugh was chilling. "The FBI task force reports to me, Morrison. Who do you think has been coordinating their investigation, keeping them focused on recent cases, away from the historical pattern?" Another pause. 1 hour, come alone, or Emily joins the collection. "Oh, and Morrison?" Sarah says hello. The line went dead. Max's posture had changed, every muscle coiled for action. Morrison recognized this stance. His partner had shifted from investigation mode to rescue operation. "Sarah's alive," Rachel whispered. "All this time?" "Warner's been keeping her as insurance," Morrison said, his mind racing. "Protection against anyone who got too close to the truth." He turned to Rachel. Call Michael. Tell him to get Reeves somewhere safe. Then contact every officer you trust absolutely. No one above sergeant rank. We don't know how high this goes. Jim? Rachel started. If Warner's running the FBI task force, then we do this off the books. Morrison was already pulling out his old tactical vest from another box. Reeves had thought of everything. Max found that tunnel network 5 years ago. Warner used the chemicals to confuse him, used department orders to shut us down. But now, Max moved to Morrison's side, body vibrating with controlled energy. This was the dog who had made them, legendary in the department. Not just tracking, but understanding, anticipating. Rachel, Morrison said, checking his weapon, get every available copy of those tunnel maps. Then contact Katie's doctor. We need to know exactly what she remembers about the underground layout. He looked at his partner. Because this time, we're not going in through the front door. Max's ears pricked forward. He understood. They had 1 hour to save Emily, find Sarah, and expose a trafficking network that had operated under police protection for 3 decades. Warner thinks he's setting a trap, Morrison said, securing his vest. But he forgot something important. He knelt beside his partner, seeing the same fierce determination in Max's eyes that he felt in his own heart. He forgot who we are. What we do. Rachel was already on her phone, mobilizing their allies. Outside, the vehicles remained, watching, waiting. Let them watch, Morrison thought. They'd be looking for a frontal assault, a desperate father charging in to save his daughter. They wouldn't be watching the tunnels. Wouldn't be expecting a strategy 30 years in the making, set in motion by a specialized breeding program that had created dogs like Max. Dogs who never forgot, who understood more than their handlers sometimes realized. 1 hour, Morrison said, checking his gear one final time. Let's go get our girls. The maintenance tunnel entrance lay hidden behind an abandoned gas station 3 blocks from the leather plant. Morrison studied the utility map one last time as Rachel's trusted officers took their positions above ground. Max stood silently beside him, wearing his old tactical vest, modified with a camera system Sandra had provided before she disappeared. Katie's doctor confirmed it, Rachel said, checking her encrypted radio. The girls heard machinery above them, leather processing equipment, but they were kept in older sections, original basement structures from the 1940s. She pointed to a faded section of the map. These tunnels predate the modern sewage system. They're not on any current city plans. Morrison nodded, understanding now why Max had been so persistent about certain locations. The dogs from the specialized program hadn't just been tracking scents, they'd been mapping the underground network, piece by piece, for decades. Michael sent this, Rachel continued, showing him a text. Before Warner's men grabbed him, the message contained a single image, a photograph of Sarah Collins, clearly recent, holding today's newspaper. She looked thin but alive, her eyes showing a determination that made Morrison's chest tighten. They're moving them tonight, Morrison said, checking his watch. Warner knows we found Reeves's evidence. He'll want to clear everything out, start fresh somewhere else. He turned to the small team Rachel had assembled, 4 officers they'd personally vetted, all with tactical experience. Remember, we're looking for 3 primary targets, Emily Morrison, Sandra Martinez, and Sarah Collins, but there may be others. Watch for cameras, motion sensors, any modern security additions to these old tunnels. Max's ears suddenly pricked, forward, his nose working the air from the tunnel entrance. Morrison recognized the change in his partner's behavior. He'd caught something significant. What is it, boy? Max moved to the tunnel entrance, then back to Morrison, his body language urgent but controlled. Morrison knelt beside him, understanding. You remember these tunnels, don't you? From before. Jim, Rachel said softly, look at this. She'd opened another file from Reeves' collection, a map overlay showing every location where dogs from the specialized program had alerted over the past 30 years. Together, they formed a clear pattern of underground routes, all converging. Near the leather plant, They were mapping it, Morrison realized. Every time a dog got close, found another entrance or section. Warner had them eliminated, Rachel finished, but he couldn't eliminate the pattern. Not with dogs like Max, bred to remember, to understand. Morrison checked his tactical gear one final time. The camera feed from Max's vest was live, transmitting to both Rachel's phone and a secure server. Insurance against Warner trying to bury evidence again. 30 minutes until Warner's deadline. He's expecting us to either surrender the evidence or try a frontal assault on the leather plant. Teams are in position, Rachel confirmed, making plenty of noise above ground, looking like we're preparing. For exactly that, she smiled grimly. Let them watch the show. Max's whine brought their attention back to the tunnel entrance. Morrison recognized his partner's urgency. Time was running out for Emily, for Sandra, for Sarah. Remember, Morrison told the tactical team, Warner's men will be using these tunnels too, moving their operation out. We're not just looking for hostages. We're looking for evidence, anything that can connect this to other operations, other cities. What about Hayes? One of the officers asked. Secondary target, Morrison replied. Warner's the priority. Hayes is just his enforcer. He turned to Rachel. Keep the above-ground teams visible. Make Warner think we're still gathering forces for a direct assault. Rachel nodded, then surprised him by pulling out Max's old service collar, the one she'd given him at the training center. Found this in Reeves's files. Thought he might want it back for this last hunt. Morrison took the collar, feeling its worn leather, remembering every case it had seen them through. As he fastened it around Max's neck, replacing the regular collar, he felt his partner straighten, as if the familiar weight completed something in him. 30 years, Morrison said quietly. Warner's had 30 years to perfect this operation, hide his tracks, eliminate threats. He looked at his partner, seeing not the aging dog of recent weeks, but the precise, determined hunter who had made them the department's top canine team. But he never understood what he was really dealing with, did he? Max's posture was perfect, every line of his body showing the focus that had made the specialized breeding program so successful and so threatening to men like Warner. Okay, partner. Morrison switched on his tactical light. One last hunt. Let's go get our girls. The tunnel air hit them like a physical presence, a mix of damp concrete, industrial chemicals, and something else that made Max's nose twitch. Morrison recognized his partner's subtle head tilt, human scents, recent ones. They weren't alone. Down here. Rachel's voice came through their earpieces, barely a whisper. Warner's men are moving. 3 vehicles just pulled up to the leather plant's main entrance. Hayes is with them. Morrison signaled the tactical team to hold position as Max worked the tunnel intersection ahead. The dog's training was evident in every movement, no wasted motion, no unnecessary noise. Above them, the thrum of industrial machinery provided cover for their advancement. Got movement on the security feeds, Rachel continued. They're making it obvious, walking right past our surveillance. Whatever they're moving, they're not taking it out the front. Morrison watched Max's behavior closely. This wasn't just tracking. Now, this was 30 years of specialized breeding coming into play. Max wasn't just following scents, he was reading the situation, understanding human patterns, just as his predecessors had done. Jim, Rachel's voice held new urgency. Katie's doctor just called. She remembered something else about the tunnels, said they could always tell when they were moving girls because of the vibrations. Leather processing machines would start up even at night to cover the sound. As if on cue, the machinery above them grew louder. Max's ears twitched, but his focus remained absolute. He'd adapted to this tactic years ago, Morrison realized. The chemicals might have confused his nose back then, but he'd learned to work around it. Multiple heat signatures, one of the tactical team reported, checking a thermal scanner, moving east through the tunnel system, but there's something else. Larger heat blooms in the walls themselves. Morrison moved closer to the scanner's display, recognition hitting him. They're not just using the main tunnels. They've cut passages into the walls, maintenance channels from the original construction. He looked at Max. understanding now why his partner had been so insistent about certain locations years ago. That's how they move people without being seen, even down here. Max's head snapped up, ears forward. Through the machinery noise, Morrison caught it too, a muffled cry. Quickly silenced. "Control, possible contact," Morrison whispered into his radio. "What's happening up top?" "Warner just arrived," Rachel reported, making a show of entering through the front. Four-man security detail. Wait. A pause. "Jim, the plates on his car. They match one of the vehicles from Reeves's surveillance photos. The one that used to park near Sarah's school." Morrison felt cold certainty settle in his gut. He's not just here to oversee the move. He's here to tie up loose ends. Max pressed against Morrison's leg, their old signal for a critical discovery. The dog's nose pointed to a section of wall that looked solid, but Morrison ran his hands over the surface, feeling the slight variation in texture. A false panel, designed to blend perfectly with the surrounding concrete. "Found an access point," Morrison reported. "Max confirms it's active. Recent sense. Timer. Check," Rachel reminded them. 15 minutes until Warner's deadline. Morrison studied the tunnel intersection, seeing it through Max's tactical understanding. The main tunnels would be watched, probably monitored. But these hidden maintenance channels? Warner's arrogance had always been his blind spot. He'd never truly understood what made the specialized breeding program so dangerous. "Team 2, maintain position in the main tunnel," Morrison ordered. "Make enough noise to be noticeable, but not threatening. Team 3, fall back to the secondary. Entrance, if they're monitoring these tunnels, I want them thinking we're still probing, still unsure." Max's subtle shift in posture told Morrison his partner had already worked out their real approach. The maintenance channel would be tight, room for one person and one dog, moving in silence. "Rachel," Morrison whispered, "how's our distraction?" "Looking beautiful," she replied, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Warner's men are all focused up here. They've even deployed additional security to the roof." Morrison gave the hand signal for the teams to take their positions. Then he knelt beside Max, checking the camera setup one final time. Everything they found, everything they saw, would be transmitted to Rachel's secure server. Warner wouldn't be able to bury this evidence. "Okay, partner," Morrison said softly, feeling the weight of Sarah's diary in his vest pocket. "Like old times, just you and me." Max's focus was absolute, his body vibrating with controlled energy. In the dim, tactical light, Morrison saw not just his partner, but the culmination of a program 3 decades in the making. Dogs bred not just to track, but to understand, to anticipate, to remember. "Find them, Max. Find our girls." The maintenance channel was barely wide enough for Morrison's shoulders, its walls slick with decades of industrial seepage. Max moved ahead with practiced silence, his tactical vest's camera capturing every turn. They'd gone perhaps 50 yards when Morrison's earpiece crackled. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the north," Rachel reported. "Government plates, FBI, task force." A pause. "Warner's reinforcements." Morrison checked his watch. 7 minutes until the deadline. Above them, the leather processing machines thundered at full power, but Max's ears kept twitching toward something else. A deeper vibration in the tunnel walls. "Generator," Morrison whispered into his radio. "They're running something down here that needs its own power supply." Max froze suddenly, head lifting. Through a crack in the maintenance channel's wall, Morrison caught a glimpse of movement in the main tunnel. Armed men escorting a figure in police uniform. Sandra Martinez, hands bound, but walking under her own power. Visual confirmation on Sandra, Morrison reported. "They're moving her through the main system." He watched Max's reaction carefully. His partner's attention remained fixed ahead, telling Morrison all he needed to know. "She's not the primary target." "Jim," Rachel's voice was urgent. "Warner's giving orders up here. They're starting some kind of countdown procedure." Max's subtle shift in posture warned Morrison a split second before they heard it, a heavy mechanical clang, followed by the sound of rushing water. They're flooding the main tunnels, Morrison realized, washing away evidence. Rachel, get our teams out of there, now. Already done, she confirmed. But Jim, that water's got to go somewhere. Morrison examined the maintenance channels. Construction with new understanding. These passages, they're not just for access, they're part of the original drainage system. He felt the vibration increase under his feet. They're going to flush everything into the river. Max pressed forward with new urgency, his body language shifting from stealth to direct action. They turned a corner, and Morrison saw why. A modern steel door had been set into the channel wall, incongruous against the old concrete. Light leaked around its edges. Found an access point, Morrison reported. Looks like his transmission cut off as Max suddenly backed up, pushing Morrison into a shallow alcove. Seconds later, the door opened. 2 armed men emerged, escorting a teenage girl Morrison didn't recognize. But Max's reaction told him everything. The slight whine, quickly suppressed, the same sound he'd made when they found Sarah's backpack 5 years ago. "Rachel," Morrison whispered when the group had passed. "There are more girls down here, recently taken. Get roadblocks on every route to the river." "Already coordinating with state police," she replied. "Warner doesn't know we've got people outside his jurisdiction, but Jim..." Emily's phone just came online for a second. Signal puts her directly below the leather plant. Morrison watched Max examine the door's locking mechanism. A keypad with a magnetic card reader. Modern security, but the door itself was connected to the old concrete with standard industrial bolts. Bolts that were showing significant rust. "Talk to me about Warner's position," Morrison requested, pulling a small pry bar from his tactical vest. "Still up top, running things by radio. He's got Hayes watching the main entrance and..." "Hold on." Rachel's voice sharpened. "Movement at the loading. Dock. They're bringing in drums of something. Industrial labels." Accelerant, Morrison guessed, working on the door's hinges. "They're not just washing away evidence. They're going to burn what's left." Max's posture changed suddenly. The alert stillness that meant immediate threat. Morrison heard it a second later. Footsteps approaching through the maintenance channel from the direction they'd come. "Rachel, we're about to go loud," Morrison warned, attacking the final hinge with renewed urgency. "Have the state police. Move in on your signal." The door gave way just as flashlight beams appeared around the corner. Morrison and Max slipped through, pulling the damaged door closed behind them. They found themselves in a small control room, its walls lined with security monitors showing various sections of the tunnel system. "They're extracting them in groups," Morrison reported, studying the feeds. "Using the maintenance channels to..." He stopped, his blood running cold. One of the monitors showed a familiar figure handcuffed to a pipe. Emily, conscious now, with Hayes standing guard. But it was another monitor that made Max growl. A teenage girl in a small concrete room, thin and pale but unmistakable. Sarah. "Collins, alive, waiting for transport. 5 minutes to deadline," Rachel updated. "Warner's men are starting to pour the accelerant down the main access points." Morrison checked his ammunition, then looked at his partner. Max's posture was perfect, every muscle ready. They had 5 minutes to save Emily, rescue Sarah, and stop Warner from destroying 3 decades of evidence. "Okay, boy," Morrison said softly. "No more sneaking. Time to hunt." The control room security feeds gave Morrison a moment's advantage, just enough to see Hayes lift his radio, presumably to report the breach. Max was moving before Morrison gave the command, years of training taking over. They burst through. The inner door, as Hayes turned, Max's tactical training evident in how he targeted the arm holding the radio, rather than going for a typical K9 takedown. The radio clattered away as Hayes stumbled back, reaching for his weapon. Morrison was on him in 2 steps, driving him away from Emily. "Get his gun, Max!" Max's response was instantaneous, clamping down on Hayes's gun arm with controlled force. Emily, despite her situation, managed a grim smile. "Took you long enough." "Dad, sorry, honey. Traffic was hell." Morrison secured Hayes while Max kept him contained. "Rachel, we've got Hayes. Emily's okay." State police are moving in, Rachel reported. But Jim, Warner's started the countdown. We're picking up multiple fires in the tunnel system. A new voice crackled over Hayes's radio. All units, execute final protocol. Burn everything. Emily, whom Morrison was quickly freeing from the handcuffs, looked up sharply. Sarah's in the lower level. I heard them talking. They're saving her for last. Warner's personal insurance policy. Max's head snapped toward the doorway, ears forward. Morrison recognized the alert. Someone was coming. Rachel, where's Warner? Still topside, but moving. Elevators descending to sub-basement 3. Morrison secured Hayes to the same pipe that had held Emily, using the man's own handcuffs. Where's the girl, Hayes? Sarah Collins. Where's Warner keeping her? Hayes laughed, a harsh sound. You don't get it, Morrison. This was never about the girls. Warner's been building this network for 30 years. Sarah? She's just one piece of leverage, one loose end among hundreds. Max growled, low and threatening. Hayes's laughter died. That dog, Hayes said, something like fear finally showing in his eyes. Warner said they were getting too smart, the whole breeding program. That's why we had to shut it down. They could understand things, remember things, like where you hide your victims. Morrison checked his weapon. Where you bury your evidence. A distant explosion rocked the tunnel system. Through Hayes's radio, they heard Warner's voice. Hayes, report status. Have you handled Morrison's daughter? Emily grabbed Hayes's radio. He's a little tied up right now, Chief Warner, but don't worry. Max remembers exactly where to find Sarah. Don't you, boy? Max was already moving toward the door, his posture showing clear purpose. Morrison recognized this behavior. His partner wasn't just tracking a scent. He was following a memory. Emily, Morrison said quickly, get to Rachel. She'll have teams. Waiting at the south exit. Dad, no, I can help. You can help by testifying. Everything you heard, everything you saw. He handed her Hayes's phone. And get this to Rachel. It's probably got enough evidence to take down half the department. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered. They're collapsing the outer tunnels, Hayes said, almost admiring. In 10 minutes, this whole section will be under water and ash. Warner's done this before. You really think one old dog can? Max's bark cut him off, sharp, authoritative. The same bark he'd used 5 years ago when he'd first found Sarah's trail. Go, Emily said, taking Hayes's gun and phone. Find her. I'll make sure this one doesn't warn anyone. She aimed the weapon at Hayes with steady hands. I had a lot of time to think about what I'd do if I got loose while they had me tied up. Morrison followed Max through the doorway as smoke began seeping into the corridor. His partner moved with certainty, ignoring the main tunnels in favor of maintenance access points that even Warner might have forgotten. Rachel, Morrison called as they ran, tell the state police to focus on the river exits. Warner will head. In there once he has Sarah already on it. But Jim, we're picking up structural warnings. The whole system could go any minute. Max stopped at an intersection, his behavior changing. Morrison recognized this reaction from their working days. He's found something. Rachel, we're 3 levels down, east side. Any power signatures? 1. Some kind of sealed room drawing independent power. But the readings are fading. They're shutting it down, Morrison realized, getting ready to move her. Max led them to what looked like a solid wall, but Morrison now knew better. He found the hidden latch exactly where his partner indicated. These dogs didn't just remember places, they remembered mechanisms, patterns. The wall panel slid aside, revealing a narrow corridor lit by emergency lighting. At its end stood Warner, one arm around Sarah Collins's throat, a gun pressed to her head. Detective Morrison, Warner said calmly, as if they were meeting in his office. I have to admit, I underestimated that dog of yours. Even after all these years, he still remembers. He tightened his grip on Sarah, who remained eerily calm. Unfortunately, this is where memory lane ends. Max stood perfectly still, but Morrison recognized his posture. This wasn't just any standoff. This was what the specialized breeding program had been created for, the perfect fusion of canine instinct and human understanding. "It's over, Warner," Morrison said quietly. "The state police have the river exits. Hayes is in custody. Your evidence is being live-streamed to Rachel's secure server." Warner smiled. "Evidence can be discredited. Witnesses can disappear. And old dogs," he aimed his gun at Max, "well, they have to be put down eventually." Sarah Collins chose that moment to speak, her voice stronger than Morrison expected. "He remembers you too, you know. From the school that day, when you were watching, planning." She met Max's eyes. He never forgot. Max moved like liquid lightning, not toward Warner but to the wall beside him, the same wall that had hidden access panels throughout the tunnel system. Warner's shot went wide as the hidden door sprung open, throwing him off balance. Sarah dropped and rolled exactly as they'd trained potential victims to do in Morrison's K9 demonstrations years ago. Morrison's tackle took Warner into the exposed maintenance shaft. The guns skittered away as they grappled in the narrow space. Warner was younger, stronger, but Morrison had something he didn't: absolute trust in his partner. "Max! Light!" Max's jaws found the power cable Warner's secret room had been running on. The emergency lights died, plunging them into darkness. In the pitch black, Warner's advantage disappeared. He'd forgotten what Hayes had remembered too late. These dogs could work in complete darkness, could understand complex tactical situations, could remember patterns and behaviors from years past. The fight ended quickly after that. The emergency room at Portland General buzzed with controlled chaos as state police processed the rescued girls. Emily, despite her ordeal, had shifted seamlessly into medical mode, helping triage the victims. Sarah Collins sat wrapped in a blanket, her parents hovering close, while Michael documented everything for the FBI's new task force, one not under Warner's control. Morrison watched from the doorway as Max moved among the rescued girls, his presence bringing calm to those still too shocked to speak. The specialized breeding program had created more than just tactical dogs. They'd created healers, too. Sandra Martinez, her arm in a sling, was already taking statements, building a case that would reach far beyond Portland. Rachel appeared at Morrison's side, her expression grim but satisfied. "Warner's singing like a bird. 30 years of trafficking operations across 12 states. Hayes, too." She smiled slightly. "Turns out even dirty cops don't like prison." The courthouse steps were crowded as Warner and Hayes were led out in chains, their plea deals ensuring they'd never see freedom again. Inside, Sarah Collins had just finished testifying, her quiet strength helping to expose a network that had operated in shadows for decades. 15 more arrests followed, including 3 police chiefs and a federal judge. Rachel stood at the podium, now wearing the commissioner's badge, announcing the reinstatement of the specialized K9 breeding program. Beside her, Max sat at attention, a new generation of carefully bred puppies already in training at the reopened facility. Morrison watched from the crowd, Emily and Sandra beside him, as his partner's legacy took shape. "The dogs remember," Rachel told the press, Max's old service collar in her hands. "And now so will we. Every victim, every case, every truth they tried to bury." 6 months after the rescue, Sarah Collins stood before a group of survivors at Portland General's new Trauma Recovery Center. Her voice, once silenced by fear, now carried strength as she shared her story. In the corner, Max lay quietly, his presence a constant comfort to those still struggling to speak about their experiences. Emily, now heading the hospital's specialized victim support unit, watched with pride as Sarah helped another young girl overcome her anxiety around police officers. The therapy program they'd developed, pairing survivors with specially trained dogs from the renewed K9 program, was showing remarkable success. Morrison observed from the doorway, remembering Sarah's words during Warner's trial. "They tried to make us forget who we were, but Max remembered for us until we could remember for ourselves. Some wounds took time to heal, but they weren't healing alone." The Portland Police Department's new K9 training facility bore a simple plaque, the Max Morrison Center for Specialized Service Dogs. Inside, Rachel supervised the latest class of handlers, each paired with descendants of the original program. Sarah, now a volunteer trainer, worked alongside them, helping handlers understand the unique bond these dogs could forge with survivors. Morrison watched from his office, officially a consulting position, but everyone knew he and Max were the heart of the program. His partner dozed nearby, grey muzzle resting on paws that had helped uncover one of the largest trafficking networks in history. Together, they'd transformed a department's darkness into a beacon of hope. On quiet evenings, Morrison still finds Max at the window, watching the street with aged but alert eyes. The German Shepherd's muzzle has whitened further, but his purpose never dimmed. Each morning, they visit the training center, where Max gently guides the new puppies, showing them what it means to serve, to protect, to remember. Sarah visits often, always bringing Max's favorite treats. He gave me back my voice, she tells, the new handlers. He remembered for all of us, until we could be strong again. And in the end, that's what Max had always done best. Not just finding the lost, but helping them find themselves again.